William Walker Atkinson's Mind Power. Chapter 5 was Mental Magic in Human Life. This is Chapter 6, the Mentative Poles. Whatever mind power may be in its ultimate nature, it is true that in its working nature or phase of operation, it seems to work along similar lines to those followed by electricity. Like electricity, mind power undoubtedly has two poles or phases. Like electricity, it travels in currents. Like electricity, it operates by induction. Like electricity, it is vibratory in its manifestation. And like the higher forms of energy, super electrical in nature, it possesses radioactivity, or radiant energy. That is, like many other forms of radiant energy, it is constantly throwing off streams of active energy in the shape of rays, vibrations, or waves. Recent scientific discoveries have proven this. Excuse me. And in the next few years, the world will be startled by additional discoveries along these lines. Already we are receiving hints of mental photographs or radiographs, and before long we shall have telementometers that will register the telemental waves. The brain I regard as in the nature of a transformer of the universal mind power, or possibly as a converter of the force into mentation. The brain cannot create mind power. Its office is merely to transform or convert the existent energy into usable forms and phases. Science agrees in the belief that in all brain processes there is an employment of some kind of energy and a, so to speak, burning up of brain substance. Just as there is a constant burning up of the elements of an electrical battery in the production of electricity, so is there a burning up of brain matter in the production of mentation. And yet science teaches us that no electricity is ever created. Simply a portion of the universal electricity is converted or transformed. And I believe that the same holds good in mental action in the brain. Excuse me. And now it's time for us to begin our consideration of the two mentative poles. In this book I shall hold to the fact that there is evident in the manifestation of mind power in any and all forms two distinct poles or phases. I find myself compelled to coin two more terms for these poles or phases, for there are none now in common use. I call these two mentative poles respectively the emotive pole and the motive pole. The word motive means that which acts, wills, moves, chooses, controls. The word emotive means that which manifests feeling, emotion, agitation, passion, sensation, etc. These definitions apply to my use of the terms in these lessons. You will be able to fix these two ideas connected with the mentative poles by thinking of the motive pole as will and of the emotive pole as feeling. The emotive pole manifests actively as desire force. The motive pole manifests actively as will power. These two poles play a most important part along the lines of telementation. Not only does desire cause the response of one's own will, but both desire and will are active forces in themselves, and act and react upon the desire and will poles of mentality of others. We shall see many evidences of this as these lessons progress. In fact, the entire theory and practice of mind power depends upon this underlying principle. Your strong desire force is able to rouse the will of another mind in response thereto. It may likewise set up vibrations in that other mind, awakening there similar desires. Your willpower may arouse desire in the mind of another and cause action in accordance therewith. It may also overpower the will of another and lead it captive. Your combined will and desire pouring out in the mentative current may produce a combined effect upon the minds of others by telemental induction. These two poles of the mind are both active and powerful in their effect. Both may be roused into intense activity, according to well-known laws, as we shall see. Let us take a few moments' time and consider the subject of desire, force, and willpower before we proceed further. Those who have studied the phenomena of mind power have generally accepted the theory that the effect upon other people, was produced by the thought of the sender. And all the teachings upon the subject have been along this line. I too fell into this error, and for many years taught of the power of thought, etc. But I have come to modify my views on the subject. Of course, everyone who has paid any attention to the subject knows that thought transference is a fact, telementation being an established reality, but there is a very great difference between the fact that thoughts may be sent and received like telegraphic messages on the one hand, and that persons may be influenced and affected and bent to the desire or will of another on the other hand. It is like the difference between thinking and doing in everyday life. One may send thoughts so that another may receive them, but what of this? What has this to do with the doing and the compelling? It is evident that the real force must be looked for in some far more elementary and vital operation of the mind than logical and reasoning thought. What is thought? Webster defines it as an exercise of the mind in any of its higher forms, reflection, cogitation. Nothing very dynamic about this, surely. We must look for something in the mind having more elementary force and power. Let us think for a moment. What part of the mind seems to produce the greatest moving power and strength? Is it not chiefly that region of the mind that produces what we call emotions, feelings, desires, cravings, passions? Does not this part of the mind really cause the greatest incentive action on our part? Is not the whole moving force largely summed up in the two words desire and will? Think of this for a moment. Why did you do this thing and that thing? Is it because you thought about it by cold logical reasoning and acted upon the impulse given thereby? Or was it not because you wanted to do it, desired to do it, felt like doing it? Is it not always the feeling or desire that is precedent to and the originator of the action? And as for thought, is it not used merely as an instrument to think up the best ways of manifesting the feeling or desire? Think of this. Is it not so? Did you ever do a thing, except under compulsion, that you did not desire to do? And was not the desire the preceding cause of your every action? Desire is the great inciting power of the mind. Desire is that which incites to action, and you always act upon the strongest desire, subject always to the restraining influence of the reason, and the restricting or impelling influence of the will. I will tell you more about this wonderful thing, the will, in a moment or two, but let us now think of desire, for that is the real emotive power. Desire originates in the subconscious regions of the mind, and often we can feel her there, before she emerges into consciousness, stirring us up with feelings of vague discontent and unrest. After a bit, excuse me, gathering enough force, she emerges into the conscious field and then begins to demand expression. Now remember, and when I say desire, I mean all kinds of desire, high and low. Many people think of desire as only the craving of a low nature, but desire really means a feeling that wants something. And that something may be the very highest aspiration of the human mind. Now, this desire, in all of its manifestations, has a mighty power of attraction and influence. It manifests as the law of Mentative Attraction, which is constantly drawing toward us the things we desire, and also drawing us toward them. Not only is this true on the conscious plane, but even on the subconscious. Our desires constitute our nature, and our nature is always operating in the mighty power of Mentative Attraction. The trouble with most of us is that we allow our desire force to be scattered and diffused, thereby lessening its attractive power. It is only when we learn the secret of concentration and focusing the desire force by the will that we are able to get results above the average. The will is the director and controller of the desire force, and upon its training and management depends the powerful use of the latter. Desire force not only has its effect upon the person and others near him, but it may be, and often is, sent for thousands of miles, where it affects and influences others in ways. Desire force is the mighty force which makes many of the phases of mind power possible. It spreads out from the mind of the person, affecting and influencing others, even at other parts of the world, if concentrated and directed by the will. It is a force beside which the X-ray and electricity fade into insignificance. It moves not merely blind, lifeless things, but the living minds, thoughts, emotions, passions, and actions of men. It is the force that rules the world and its destinies. Like any other great natural force, it is capable of being used for good or for evil. It is neither good nor evil. It is either or both, according to the mind in which it originates. What phase of mental effort is more apt to be emotive force? The cold, lifeless thought about an abstract metaphysical proposition, or a mathematical problem, on the one hand, and a warm, vital wave of feeling, emotion, or passion such as love, hate, ambition, aspiration, courage, and desire on the other hand. And remember that these last mentioned all belong to the feeling side of the mind, and all are manifestations of elementary desire. Desire is at the bottom of all feeling. Before we can love or hate, there must be desire. Before we can have ambition or aspiration, there must be desire. Before we can manifest courage and energy, there must be desire. Desire for something must underlie all life action, desire conscious or subconscious. Abstract thought is a cold, bare thing, lacking vitality and warmth. Desire is filled with life, throbbing, longing, wanting, craving, persisting and ever pressing outward toward action. Desire, indeed, is the phase of our mental action that is a motive force. And not only does desire incite us to action, move us to accomplish its ends, but it also, when sufficiently strong, surges out from our minds in great waves and clouds of invisible and subtle energy or force, and it travels here and there toward the object of its inner urge, affecting, attracting, drawing, forcing the desired thing into submission to its cravings and demand. In the presence of some strong man or woman, that is, in the presence of one whose desire burns fiercely and strongly, and whose will has learned to concentrate the desire force, one may actually feel the impact of the elementary principle of mind as it vibrates in great waves from the brain and nervous system of such a one. Who has not met people who actually seemed to be living desire and will? The source of desire force exists in every person, and it may be developed to a wonderful degree. The desires of many of you, of the majority of the race in fact, never get further than the faint want to stage. These people wish for things in a faint pink tea way. They never want a thing hard enough to stir their desire force into action and make the thing come to them, or else make it take them to the thing. The majority of people do not know how to desire. They do not know what it is to be filled with that intense, eager, longing, craving, ravenous desire that fills them with a new and a mighty force and makes them demand things instead of merely asking for them. They are like sheep, like pigeons or rabbits, and sit meekly around while the strong ones of the race, the ones filled with masterful desire, walk around and pick up every good thing in sight. And it serves them right, too, for they are not exercising the force which nature has given them for the purpose of self-protection and use. They have had the elementary vigor and virility bleached out of them by the so-called refinements of one phase of civilization, and have nearly lost all that goes to make up manly men and natural women. They've become beggars, mendicants of nature instead of masters of her. The forces of nature are at the disposal of the man of vigor and determination and desire. Such a one has but to knock at the door of attainment and have it opened to him. Instead of doing this, the majority of us sit around the doorsteps whining that the door shall be opened to us. In the name of human power, friends, get up and fill yourself with powerful desire, and then march up to the door and smite it fiercely with your mailed fist, demanding masterfully, "Open for me, the master!" And it will fly open at your call. I have shown you that desire force is the great force underlying the phenomena of mental magic. Excuse me. But desire force without the aid of will is like steam unconfined and undirected and gunpowder fired into open air, both wasted energy. The will is the lever and the director of the great power of desire, and without its aid, the latter is almost inoperative and ineffectual. But let us examine into the operation of the will. The will has two offices in connection with desire. These two offices may be spoken of as 1, the directing office, and 2, the protecting office. The will acts as the arouser, director, restrainer, concentrator, and manager of the great occult force of desire. What is generally known as willpower is often in reality merely desire force, strongly concentrated and directed to a focus by the power of the will. Remember this, please, for it will enable you to form a better idea of the subject of willpower. Often when you hear willpower spoken of, whatever is attributed to it is really said of and attributed to desire force controlled, directed, and focused by will. The effort of the will is operated in the direction of this directing, focusing, concentrating, etc. And in the degree that the will is trained to do so, this is the degree of willpower of the individual. Not only is the will able to do this, but it is able also to direct the desire force into the mind of other persons, awakening similar vibrations there. And then by its own power, the will is able to direct the desire force of the other persons into action, taking away that office from the will of the other persons, if their will be not strong enough in its protective office to resist the attack. The idea of willpower is more familiar to the minds of people than is that of desire force. All recognize the wonderful power of the will, and know of many instances of great accomplishment by reason of its power. And yet, how few have stopped to consider that unless there was a preceding desire, there could be no manifestation of will. Unless a person desires, that is, wants to do a thing, he will manifest no willpower. But, on the other hand, one may desire to do a thing, and unless the will is aroused and applied, no action will occur. Desire arouses will, and will may stimulate desire. The two act and react upon each other. The two should work in unison, and the trained individual has both under control and pulling well together like a well-trained team. Willpower is more than a mere determination to act, although that mental attitude and action is manifested in willpower, yes. It is a living force. Desire is the sister, and will the brother twin, and both together manifest that which we know as dynamic mentation. Willpower is more than a mere mental faculty. It is a mighty attribute, the influence of which may extend far beyond the mind of the person manifesting it. The greatest feats of the occult magicians depend upon telementation operated by trained willpower. And the so-called great men of history, ancient and modern, had their source of strength in this willpower, which they trained and developed to an extraordinary degree. The exercise of will shows itself in two ways. 1, the mastery of one's own mind, and 2, the mastery of the minds of others. The second is well nigh impossible unless the first be accomplished. One must first train his mind so that he will hold it firmly in the grasp of the will, and prevent it from jumping this way and that way, instead of moving ahead to its purpose. When one has so trained his mind to be obedient to his will, then it can be held steady and one-pointed, as the Hindus say. Then is he in a position to direct his mentative currents upon others to the best advantage. But so long as his mind is in a stage of disorganization, one faculty pulling this way and another that way, and so on. He cannot hope to concentrate upon others the force that is being wasted in keeping order at home. When the mind is mastered by the will, then may new territory be conquered. The term willpower is commonly used in connection with the manifestation of firmness or determination. Well, the determined will is known as a mighty factor toward attainment and accomplishment. And I think it well to consider this fact at this point. For back of all outward manifestations of mentative influence along active lines lies this determined will of the individual. The more determined and firm the will of the individual, the stronger the mentative influence emitted and emanated by him. This statement should not require proof, for its truth is apparent to all who have made a study of man and his powers. It has been recognized by writers in all times. Here are a few quotations that will tend to fix the matter firmly in your mind and create in you a desire to manifest the determined will, the lever that directs and concentrates mind power. Buxton said, "The longer I live, the more certain I am that the great difference between men, between the feeble and the powerful, the great and the insignificant, is energy, invincible determination or a purpose once fixed, and then victory or death. That quality will do anything that can be done in this world, and no talents, no circumstances, no opportunities will make a two-legged creature a man without it." Donald G. Mitchell said, "Resolve is what makes a man manifest. Not puny resolve, not crude determination, not errant purpose, but that strong and indefatigable will which treads down difficulties and danger as a boy treads down the heaving frostlands of winter, which kindles his eye and brain with a proud pulse beat toward the unattainable. Will makes men giants." Disraeli said, "I have brought myself by long meditation to the conviction that a human being with a settled purpose must accomplish it, and that nothing can resist a will which will stake human existence upon its fulfillment." Sir John Simpson said, "A passionate desire and an unwearied will can perform impossibilities, or what may seem to be such to the cold and feeble." John Foster said, "It is wonderful how even the casualties of life seem to bow to a spirit that will not bow to them, and yield to subserve a design which they may, in their first apparent tendency, threaten to frustrate. When a firm, decisive spirit is recognized, it is curious to see how the space clears around a man and leaves him room and freedom." As we have seen, the use of the will as a projector of mentative currents is the real base of all mentative induction, under whatever name it may manifest. And the phase of will known as telementation is the form, the results of which strike the observer with the greatest force. The will currents of a strong man reach out far beyond the limits of his brain, and influence people and things, causing them to be inclined toward his wishes. Many men have worked their will upon others far removed, and much that is known as thought transference, telepathy, mental influence, etc., is really this working of the will currents over space. What occultists have called thought forms, etc., are really manifestations of the energy of the will. Will is a living force that can be projected and operated at a distance. It has a property of reacting upon others and permeating them with a mental essence not their own, unless they repel the invasion or fortify themselves against the aggression. Desire and will are more elementary forms of mentation than thought. They underlie thought. Without desire and will, there can be no thought. They ever precede thought and are closely allied to the essence of what we call feeling. Many people live almost altogether on the feeling plane and exercise but little thought. The infant feels, desires, and wills before it can think. Desire and will are really the medium from which thought is evolved. A modern writer on mysticism has said, "There is no force in the universe except will force," meaning, of course, the great natural force of energy called will, of which desire and will in man are expressions. Desire is a natural force, and can be used, managed, controlled, and directed, just as can be any other natural force. And what we know as willpower is the positive phase of directed desire. The Orientals have trained and cultivated this willpower to degrees that seem miraculous to the Western mind, and by this trained willpower they perform the so-called miracles that confound the Western scientist. But even the West has its men of iron will, whose influence is felt on all sides, and whose power is openly acknowledged by the public. In the East, these men are generally hermits and sages, while in the West, they are generally men of action, leaders, captains of industry, etc. Mind power is the essence of all mentative induction. It includes the positive, forcing, impelling, compelling, driving phase called will as its motive pole. And as its emotive pole, it has that attracting, drawing, pulling, luring, charming, fascinating something that we call desire. Mind power manifests in the phases of both desire and will, as we generally use these terms, for it is composed of the elements of both. Will may be said to represent the masculine side of mind power, and desire the feminine side. It may help you to fix in your mind the attributes, characteristics, and nature of these two phases of mentative energy by associating them with the idea of masculine and feminine. I wish that you would learn to think of the desire force as the warm, ardent, fiery, forceful energy underlying the manifestations of mind power, and of the willpower as the cold, keen, strong, directing, controlling projector of the energy. By fixing these mental images in your mind, you will be better able to manifest the two phases as occasion rises. Besides its office as the director of the energy, the will serves a very important office as the restrainer of desire force. When under the control of the I, capital letter I, of the person, and taking the suggestion of reason and judgment, it is able to prevent one from expressing undesirable or hurtful desires. It refuses to project the desire force, or to allow the desire to take effect in action. It also turns back the desire upon itself and refuses to allow it to manifest. It is the utmost importance that the individual acquire a mastery of his will, for by doing so, he will be able not only to express his desires with the greatest force and effect, but also will be enabled to restrain hurtful desires and to prevent their manifestation upon the plane of action. And the will has still another important office. It acts as a protector. The will repels the influence or vibrations of another mind and renders its possessor immune to undesirable thought waves. It creates a protective aura around the individual, which will turn aside the thought waves or vibrations which may reach him, whether such be sent directly to him or whether they are the vibrations emanating from minds of others and unconsciously set forth. The will, when properly used, acts as an insulator for attacks upon the desire pull of one's mind and prevents the vibrations from reaching their mark. And if it be well trained and strengthened, it will be able to resist the most powerful attacks upon it by the wills of others, and will beat back the vibrations which would force their way into its stronghold to take it captive. Chapter 7 will be Desire and Will in Fable.